All right, welcome to Basics of SketchUp for Education Part 1. In this first video, we're going to focus on the core features of SketchUp for Education and kind of do an introduction on the basics of navigation and how to get drawing. So without any further ado, we'll get started. It's worth noting that there are three versions of SketchUp. There's SketchUp, what used to be called SketchUp Make, which I think now is just SketchUp, which is an entirely free program for everybody and anybody, but it's definitely lacking core features. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, there's SketchUp Pro, which is an actual downloadable program, which has some more advanced features for like professionals and that sort of thing. But somewhere in the middle, you have SketchUp for Schools. And with SketchUp for Schools, it's basically the free version of the software with some special integrations for things like Google Classroom, most notably Google Drive, which are incredibly useful for educators who are trying to teach any kind of CAD modeling or anything 3D print related, um, and it's super useful. So with that being said, I'm actually going to show you how we do that. First, we'll start by going just to Google Drive. So this is my Google Classroom Drive, and the way that you would, share anything with your kids, you definitely want to have a folder ready to go. And the same goes for if you're a student and you're looking to share your work with your teacher, you're going to want to start by making a folder in Google Drive. So just right click here in Google Drive, hit new folder. Let's entitle this one. Um, Now, just for the sanity of your own teacher, if you're a student, don't just make the folder 3D prints. You might want to do like your last name or something like that, so that way when you share this, you can be identified by your teacher. So I'm just going to say create and learn 3D prints. Okay, create it, and then you'll see that in Google Drive, it's made it right there. So now that that's done, we can go back to SketchUp for Schools. Now, this is the primary interface of SketchUp for Schools. You can see just like a couple things from noting. There's this kind of odd cowboy that's on the beginning of all of these. I think that's more just as a reference for scale in the beginning. I find it kind of weird, but kind of adorable at the same time. But here in the top left, you'll notice there's some file features. You'll see that your model name, some file operations, and you can see this status right here on whether or not a model is saved. And you always, just like in anything, want to save fairly routinely. So let's go ahead and give our model a name. For this project I'll be showing you today, we're going to make my current class is working on a car chassis, so that way they can 3D print basically a model of a car chassis, and we have some little hobby motors we're going to put in there. So let's just call this, I'm not the most creative type, so let's just call this car. Yeah. How about just car? Yeah, I like that. So we'll hit OK there. Now you'll see that your Google Drive pops up. So we'll go ahead and hit Create and Learn 3D Prints. And you'll see it populate there in the top. And we're all set to go. So with other file operations, when we get to the actual part where we want to, set it to print, there's some features that we'll explore here, probably in another video, not in this one. So there we go. Let's get drawing. First of all, let's get weird guy off of here. All you need to do is highlight it just like you would, a picture or any text in a Word document, and then just hit delete or backspace. Both will work. Next, we're just going to learn how to kind of navigate around. But first, let's just for reference, we'll get a box here just so that way you can see how we manipulate this. So I have this box, no specific dimensions or anything like that. And I will admit that using any version of SketchUp is tremendously easier if you have a mouse. And I'll show you exactly why. The scroll wheel on a mouse in particular is a very useful tool for navigating around SketchUp. For one, uh, act like you're scrolling down a page and you'll zoom out. Act like you are scrolling up a page and you'll zoom in. Now, wherever you've got your cursor centered is where it's going to kind of use as a reference for zooming. So for the far right side, you'll notice that we kind of zoom out towards the left. Alternatively, we zoom in, we'll kind of center on that. So when you're trying to navigate around your model, it's useful to keep in mind wherever your cursor is what it's using as reference point. So let's say we want to zoom in to this corner right here. As we zoom in, you'll notice that it's staying centered around where my cursor is located. Oh, and we've zoomed in just a little too far. All right, pretty self-explanatory. Now, as you get closer to something, you actually won't zoom in quite as much because SketchUp is a pretty smart program and it understands that you're not going to try and 3D model things down on a micrometer scale. So it kind of exponentially decreases as you get closer. So let's zoom back out to here. Alternatively, you might want to navigate around. So let's do the first tool here down on the bottom. There's this orbit tool, which you can select and basically just click and drag to circle around a model. And it works in the same way. So in the sense that like when you use your zoom tool, it kind of centers around where your cursor is. So if you're up here, for instance, it's going to act different than when it's necessarily, as you move around. So yeah. Additionally, if you're just on the regular cursor tool and you use, if your mouse does indeed have like a secondary or excuse me, like a scroll wheel button, you can actually push the scroll wheel button and use that around so you don't have to select the tool every single time. Super useful. Okay, so now that we've got the basics of navigating around, let's go back to the interface a little bit. So let's go ahead and highlight this and delete it. And I'm glad I started with that one because we have our mouse tool. Functions just like it would a mouse in any other program, right? You can highlight things, you can click on certain things. The world is your oyster in that regard. Next, you have an eraser. I feel it's pretty self-explanatory what the eraser would do. Anything that this touches as you're clicking on it is going to erase. Next is the paint one. Now the paint one is kind of neat. We'll actually come back to that and play with it here in a minute. I do want to point out that just due to the limitations of 3D printing, you might have the colors are not going to affect your model as they go into a 3D printer. But say you are doing with SketchUp, it's not just for 3D modeling, but you can do landscapes, you can do architectural, like if you wanted to draw like your own house, you can change like surface textures and that sort of thing. So that's really more what this is used for. So let's get to the nitty gritty, the drawing tool. Now the first drawing tool, there's two little things here. There's a freehand and then there's a line tool. So let's start with the line tool. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It draws, you guessed it, lines. So wherever you start, you can start moving around. And you'll notice that there's some color changes happening here as I'm moving around. Those color changes, as you can see, are corresponding to the axes in our virtual world here. So they make great reference points. So if you want to make sure that something is perfectly square or make sure that you're, indeed going up and not just away from something, you can use the blue axis. So let's go ahead and follow the green axis for now and just kind of click freehand. Now we can draw, let's start with just like a rectangle where we're using the axes as kind of reference points. So something I want to point out right here is you see how two different lines popped up? You have the green line, which is the one I'm drawing, and you have a red line, which is an inference point. And inference points are a really useful feature in SketchUp. For example, the red one here, which shows that directly from that initial point that I started in, that if we traveled along that axis, it would meet this current point, which I haven't even made yet. But let's go ahead and make it, and let's see if it's indeed true. See, so it kind of locked it there. So SketchUp's a pretty smart program, and then it realized that I was probably trying to make a rectangle. So it gave me a nice little reference point there to make my life easier. Now let's go ahead and finish that. You'll notice that as soon as I finished that square, it automatically filled in this area in the middle. So it kind of assumed, if you will, that I was trying to make a flat surface. So now let's say we didn't want to, we could then, delete the inside there. But, let's be real. We definitely wanted a square. So now to undo that delete, you can use, just like in any Word document program, you can use Control Z. Alternatively, there are these buttons down here in the bottom left that are undo and redo buttons. So you can use those to manipulate if you make a mistake as well. I'm not exactly sure how many times you can go back, but I know you can undo multiple things and redo multiple things. So very useful tool. You'll be using undo and redo a lot, especially when you're getting started and you're making mistakes. So let's move on. So with our line tool, we can also move up along the blue axis, make a 3D shape. Follow our red inference point. Now, if you want to trigger an inference point, a great way to do it is to hover over points here, and you can kind of determine a few things. If it's red and it will actually say on edge, that indicates that you are currently on an edge. If you have this blue dot, it indicates you are in the middle of a point. So between these two, this blue part is exactly in the middle. And you can see the endpoints too, they are in green. So if we inference one and move up, you'll notice that there's a blue dotted line. It states that I am actually exactly on there. So now you can use multiple inference points, like I just triggered there. So now I'm directly above that corner, and I am currently moving along the red axis. So I can go ahead and hit that, and we've got a side of our box. So let's try it again here with this endpoint. Let's go ahead and trigger the corner there, rise up, and fill in the rest of the box. One more time, and point, follow the, oops. Yeah, as you can tell, I'm not exactly a pro with this. Let's kind of adjust it because I think it's trying to put it on the face there. Oop. So I kind of made one directly to the thing there. Never mind, because this is actually the hard way to make a box. Let's do the easy way. So let's go ahead and undo these. And actually an easier way, if we just wanted to make a box, is the next tool I'm going to show you, which is the push and pull tool. So if you click over here, there's three options. Select the push pull, and you can actually just grab onto any flat surface and actually move it up that way. Way easier than trying to draw all the walls of a box yourself. Now you might have an irregular shape that will require you to do the box at times, but the push pull is 100% the easiest way to do most most stuff. So there we go. We've got a box. Now it's also important to mention that the push-pull tool, we can manipulate any surface even after the fact. So I can grab any side here. We can even grab the bottom and pull that down. Super useful for doing anything where you just want to expand an edge a little bit or maybe just adjust something. It's really, really cool. So next, now you saw the first time that I drew a square, I did it with the line tool. Additionally, we can also use this little polygon tool over here. So if you hover over, there's a couple different options, 3D text, polygons, and we'll start with the rectangle. So on any surface, and you notice how SketchUp automatically detects that I'm on a surface going straight up and down. So we can start drawing here. We'll make it a square. And now we can use this push-pull tool again to manipulate our 3D image just on that one face. So it's a really quick tool, and it works both. We can go into objects as well. So now we've got a perfect box inside a box. A lot easier than trying to draw inside with the line tool and then match everything up. So let's experiment with another one. So we've got a circle tool where we can make circles and use the push-pull tool as well as there. Really cool. And now the polygon one is a little bit different. And I think this is a good point to point out in the bottom right-hand side of our screen, there's kind of a little data entry box here. And this is useful with all the tools. So let's look at the line tool first. And I can draw this line tool. And if you pay attention to the bottom right, you can actually, if you need to be precise with a measurement, you can type in, for instance, I'm going to type in 2 inches. Hit enter, and it automatically locks that line to 2 inches. And that's the same for polygons as well, and squares and what have you. So let's go back to the square, and let's say I want to make this 2 by 2. So I hit 2, comma, 2, enter, and it locks it to a 2 by 2 polygon, which is way easier than trying to draw out all the lines by yourself. So I kind of skipped over the polygon part here, and I'll show you why. Because when we're on the polygon portion, we can first select how many sides we want our polygon to have. So it starts off by default as a hexagon, but I want to make an octagon. So let's select our tool. I'm going to hit an octagon has 8 sides, so hit enter. Whoops. So 8, click, 8, enter. Guess I am really struggling with this part. That's okay, we'll edit it. All right, so we'll move on and select our polygon tool. And so if I want to change the number of sides that my polygon has, for this instance, let's do a pentagon. So I can hit the number 5, enter, and it automatically locks to a pentagon. Now once I click and start moving around, you'll see that it becomes a 5-sided polygon. Now it's important to point out that you can only do like perfect polygons, equal ones where all the sides are equal. It can't just make a decision to do like a stranger shape like a star, but you can use these basic ones to get started on one. So let's go ahead and make my pentagon right there. Now we can use the push-pull tool to manipulate that. Now additionally, if you want to do something different, you can use these as, kind of ad hoc reference points. And we can, let's draw just like a basic star, right? With our line tool. Cool. But you'll notice if we try to use the push-pull tool on just one of these things, we just end up getting, smaller pieces of polygon. So let's go ahead and undo that. So we actually need to get rid of these here in the middle. So that's our next part we're going to show is just a really quick instance here. You'll notice when you click, it only selects one line segment at a time. Well, if you hold the Shift key, you can actually select multiple parts and then delete or manipulate in any way you see fit. And that makes our lives a lot easier. So let's go ahead and use the push-pull tool again. And now we've got a star. Pretty easy, right? Way easier than, trying to draw all those lines individually. It's all about being efficient. All right, so we've covered polygons, we've covered the push and pull, we pulled the line. Now, a next one that I really think is useful would be this move tool. And now in this move tool, there's three different options in here, but we'll start with the actual, just the regular moving. If you take the cursor and select an object or a group of objects and you push this move tool, you can actually grab onto any desired point. So we can grab onto this corner point right here, and we can move our whole set of objects around. And reason this is useful is because say you're drawing a complex thing that if you're doing, say, a smaller part on a larger part and you are trying to move around, it's very difficult to um, start manipulating stuff and other stuff getting in the way, and you just want to move something away for a time being. For instance, I was doing a project where I was making a barn door, and every single time when I was trying to do the details on the door, everything else was getting in the way. So I did the door separate, and then I was able to use the move tool to reattach the door to the barn when I was done. Just one example. But this is really useful for repositioning objects. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be a whole group of objects. You can actually say you just want to adjust one little piece. You can also take that, select a line, and start doing stuff like this, which clearly not necessarily a desired result you might have, but can still be done. Let's go ahead and undo that. So next we'll go to the rotate tool. And the rotate tool is super useful for, say you make an object and you want to turn it. Let's go ahead and select our object again, and let's turn this guy 90 degrees. So we'll hit rotate, select rotate, and then pick a surface that you want to rotate it on. So I want to rotate this on this face to the right. So I'll select it. That's our first reference point. And now you'll see that the axes show up. Kind of hard to see. We'll zoom in a little bit. So you see how it turns green there or turns blue? Well, we want it to lock directly along the green axis, so we'll select that. And now we can rotate the entire selected object. So we want it to go exactly 90 degrees, so I want to make sure this is locked to the blue axis. And there we go. We turned the entire thing on its side. And you can do the same thing again with virtually any other side. So let's grab the rotate tool again. And now it doesn't always necessarily have to be exactly 90 degrees. You can select there, and let's say I want to do it 45 degrees. In the same way that you do distances, on the bottom right, you'll notice that it says angle. So let's go ahead and hit 45 degrees, and boom, we can turn it 45 degrees. Pretty easy, right? Right. So one more in the movement tool here is scale. Now, if you have a selected image like I did, it will automatically lock to that. But say you just want to highlight just a few parts. So let's just do our star here, and we want to scale this. And to scale something means that we're just making it bigger or smaller with proportion. So if we hit scale, automatically goes here. And now there's a different number of different ways that you can scale things. You can do up and down, which kind of stretches things. But say we want to keep everything uniform. So you want to select the corner points, and as you scale it, you can make something bigger or smaller. So let's make this star just a little bit bigger. Let's reposition a little bit. We want this to come down more. So let's do scale. There we go. That's good enough for me. So there we go. We just made that whole thing bigger proportionate to the size that we selected, and we didn't have to do the entire thing. But now I want to make the whole thing bigger. So let's go ahead and select it again, hit scale, and we can make this whole thing as big or as small as we want it. Way easier than, having to start over. All right, so lastly, just a couple more I want to cover. Probably my favorite thing about SketchUp is it allows you to be very precise. So when you were seeing that we were typing in stuff before to lock measurements, sometimes you're not exactly sure that you want it to be that long, so you can actually measure things. So there's this tape measure tool. I'm only going to focus, now there is a protractor and there's some other features, but we're just going to focus on the basic tape measure. And you can do pretty much what a tape measure in real life would do. You click on one, click on another side, and it tells you how far apart they are. So this is about 1 foot 2 inches, but you can go to any reference point you want. So we can measure it there. We can measure just how wide across our star is right there. And when you do that, it will kind of put some lines on there so you can see where your measurements are at, which is really useful if you are wanting to keep that reference point, so when you draw your lines, you'll actually lock on them just like it would be any other edge inference point. So if you want to space two objects a certain distance away, it's also very useful. Okay, now lastly, we have this walk tool. And I personally have only used this a handful of times, but I figured I'd show you anyway. It's all about camera position. So you can use the walk tool to um, kind of almost function like you're walking towards something or away or to the side of something. And so if you need to get really precise with um, your position of your camera, it is a useful tool to use. Additionally, there's like this part right here where you can kind of position your camera in a very particular spot. So let's select it again. Let's say I want to go to this point right here. Oh, that kind of messed us up. But you get the idea that we can, and you can do it just on a like a vector basis too. So you can take your guy and drag him and does some weird flipping and stuff. Like I said, I don't use this a whole lot. I feel it's a little more simple just to focus on the scroll wheel and that sort of thing, but it's still very useful. Well, all right. Well, I don't think I'm going to print this, but it was still a really great example to show everybody exactly how SketchUp works. Uh, let's go ahead and delete some of these. So no star hammers getting printed today. But anyway, I hope you found that this video was enjoyable. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, comment, all of those things. And we'll see you all next time.